we should see a recording come up here. Good. I see some nodding heads. I hope that means that you see a recording, a recording light. So with that, I'm going to introduce James. James is a consultant who helps organizations develop relationships with Indigenous communities, and he's a cross-cultural broker and resource. He works with the federal government and with higher education and nonprofit organizations, and he works both in the US and internationally, helping organizations at the interface of Indigenous knowledge and Western knowledge. And we're lucky because James is actually part of CERES. He works with the North Central Climate Adaptation Science Center in that cross-cultural broker capacity. And so I've known James as a colleague for a long time, and I feel like we're really fortunate to have him as part of CERES now. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to James and let him share some of his wisdom with us.
Oh, well, great. Well, welcome everybody to this lunchtime, mountain time webinar. Thank you, Suzanne Sullivan, for that great introduction. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today, and I happy to hear CERES is working on the strategic plan for diversity. And so today I will share some of my personal work thoughts, experiences, kind of what brought me here today in terms of the work that we're doing at CERES, as Suzanne mentioned, the NCCAT and other things that I'm involved in. So additional to my introduction, I will also say that I'm a member of the Rosebud Sioux tribe here in South Dakota. I'm based out of Rattling, South Dakota, so I'm one of those off-site employees of CERES. And so I love the Black Hills of South Dakota, and I call that home. Also, I would say that in terms of this beginning, that I really appreciate the opportunity to work with CERES, the University of Colorado Boulder, and the NCCAT. We have a bunch of colleagues there, and I've come to learn through this past 2 years or so, working closely with these folks to really figure out how we do our work better, how we do our work more effective, and how do we know that we're doing our work effective, especially working with Indigenous people. So I'm going to use the word Indigenous people today instead of tribal, just for the fact that my work has taken me globally now, and I'll talk about that today. So with that, Suzanne, she's going to run my slides. So next. So you probably read this description in the webinar announcement, but again, I want to talk about recommendations for working with Indigenous communities. How do we build this foundation to do that kind of work? I want to share some practices that I've been involved in that can maintain effective collaborations. And I really think it's important that what we're talking about today and the work that's happened at CERES, relates to these specific sort of impacts. And that's the STEM workforce and in particular, our Indigenous youth. Next. So I'm going to focus in the beginning of this talk on tribal colleges and universities. So this is a map. I really like this map. Maybe you've seen it, maybe you haven't. But this is all the tribal colleges that in America or North America. And that cool blue star there is my own fancy graphic work. That's CU Boulder. But I just sort of want to, again, start the talk in terms of, begin to lay a context for how I got here in terms of this work, but also things that I've learned through the years and how we're going to share that today and what we need to do. But it's just an incredible thing. The tribal colleges are a great phenomena in Indian education. They're all at different levels in their development. They all sort of have different kinds of things, but ultimately the goal is to prepare American Indian people for higher education, retain them, graduate them, and support them as they go out into the world. Next slide. So this is my alma mater. This is Sinte Gleshka University. Sinte Gleshka is a Lakota word for spotted tail, one of our esteemed leaders. And so my story begins here at Sinte Gleshka University, and where I really, for the first time, and most of our Indigenous people, our youth, as they consider education, this is where the culture meets the higher educational, where it's where they two meet, I think, in terms of what it means to go to college, study, graduate, and pursue a career. For me, it was Sinte Gleshka University that really said it was okay to be an American Indian and to pursue our education. It's as fundamental as that. And so that's why I think they're very important for us to consider today as we think about our strategy. And so I was hired in 1998. And so there, with my background in environmental science, I went to my first climate change meeting. The first national assessment was in 1998, Atlanta, Georgia. And I was invited there to go and see and participate. And that's where I really saw a lot of the work that I got involved in there for the first time. I met a lot of federal officials, high-ranking officials there at that meeting, who became my partners, who became my mentors. And so as a tribal person coming in new into something like this, that was really important. That first meeting was really important. It kind of shaped the direction I was going into in terms of science and traditional knowledge. So next. So I like to share this slide because when I brought back that information from the climate assessment meeting, I talked with our president here, Dr. Lionel Bordeaux. That's a picture of him here. I think he's the longest tenured university president in history, or right up there in terms of in America. And when I asked him, I said, we really want to look at this science. We want to look at this technology. We want to bring it here, and I want to take a run at it. I want to try it. And this is what he told me. He said, when our founding fathers of Sinte Gleshka got together and sort of envisioned what a tribal college would be, they really looked at not only the past, our traditional knowledge, our traditional ways, and our traditional culture, but also I think they had a vision for the future, knowing that our world was changing and that technology and science would have a role in that. So that's a very powerful statement. That's a very powerful affirmation for me as a young person coming into this work, saying, here's what we want to do. Here's how we think about it. Here's how we sort of articulate it. And here's how I think we should go. Next slide. So when I started at Sinte Gleshka University, I was trying to figure out how do we get started? What do we need to do first? And at that time, President Clinton issued this executive order, 13021, tribal college universities, that really directed federal agencies to work with tribal colleges. So I learned about this, and I said, how are we going to implement that? How are we going to take advantage of this? And is this a way that's going to help us build a partnership with the federal agencies? So I think that's important. That was beginning of a foundation of sort of why we need to do this and how we think about approaching the federal government to work together. Next. So one of the first areas I wanted to build was Earth observation or geospatial technology program. And so in South Dakota, we have the USGS Aerial Data Center. So we approached Aerial Data Center around 2000 saying, we want to sort of build our own Indian version of Aerial Data Center at Sinte Gleshka University. We want to gather data. We want to work with the data. We even want to value add to the data, but also we want to use that data to address issues related to land management. So USGS was ready, we were ready, and so we signed a memorandum of understanding in October 2000, and we did that through something called a Wolokota ceremony. And so it was a way to bring sort of treaty making. And we bring two entities like the tribal colleges, the tribe, and the federal agency together. So we signed this agreement. And I thought, and looking back, I think it was very important that we did it this way because it helped establish a framework of what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, who's going to do it, and again, what's the outcome for this kind of work. So Wolokota ceremony was also an important part of this because it sort of established culturally it established spiritually this relationship that we're going to work together, we're going to learn about each other, we're going to do things together, and with that, we hope that it's going to create a better future for our people, for our university, and also for the federal government, who was really interested in working with us because they wanted to see more American Indian people in their workforce. They wanted to see more American Indian people in tribal governments use their data and their science, and also maybe to partner on some proposals or some of that research work as well. Next. So, so we had a whole process to do that. And I use this historical stuff because I think it's important. We had a signing event. We had our elders involved in it. The picture on top is the late Albert Whitehat. I love that picture because he's in his traditional regalia, if you will, and there's an image of Rosebud, a satellite image, Landsat 7 image there. And, that one, again, that was used to sort of show the present and the past and how we involved the community in signing this agreement. We also involved the community. So that picture on the bottom left of to my screen is the community coming shaking our hands, acknowledging they support this. Again, that's a cultural practice that we do when we do those kind of things like the Woolakota ceremony. And the other picture to the right, bottom right, is us around the table. We are discussing, how we're going to go forward. And I think it's important, again, to show the sort of the quality of the partnership, that we're sitting around the table and we're all agreeing and all working together how to figure this out, what to do next. Next slide. So what I want to do here is just show you the agreement. So this is the agreement that was signed between the university, the tribe, and the United States Geological Survey. Next slide. And so we had authorities. I think that's important. I think we had to fundamentally define how this agreements go forward. So we really went back to how we think the federal government should work with tribal colleges or tribal nations. We looked at the scope. So we weren't trying to do everything, but that just gives you a highlight some of the activities that we wanted to do together. A lot of it was programming, a lot of it was faculty support, student internships, participating in USGS programs, consultation, all those things that an agreement entail in terms of a scope. Next slide, please. I think the key part of this was really trying to define the responsibility. So we put together a leadership group. I think this is important to think about for CERES, is that, in terms of working with tribal folks, is that having those sorts of leaders, thought leaders around the table to help guide the partnership. So that was important. So we had high level participation in that leadership group, which helped define and follow and track the work that we're doing together. So again, that says that outlines the responsibility of the USGS. It outlines the work of SGU. So it was sort of this idea that we're going to do this together, and here's how we lay it out in terms of what we're going to do. Next slide. So the tribe was going to also have a role in this, and some of the things that they're going to do there. So again, whatever the tribe's needs, whatever research opportunities we were going to be that. Again, it was signed. Again, that was signed in 2006. Next slide, please. So from that agreement, I'm going to share some activities that we did. So one of them was this, what we call the Strategic Enterprise Alliance seed program. And so in the center of it, you see keeping spirituality at the center. So what we wanted to do was really take advantage of the USGS in terms of their network and their programs, and how they at Aeros Data Center worked with private industry to support the work in terms of contracting. You see in a circle there, we wanted to look at schools. We wanted to look at how we got involved in a budget. So we had a budget for these programs. We wanted to think nationally. Obviously, we wanted to do research projects to address serious problems. We felt that this is a long-term view, so we wanted to do it in adult lifelong courses. How do we adjust the curriculum at SGU to do that? And also to support existing programs. So grant writing, negotiations, MOU, and SBIR program. So again, this was an idea that we wanted to diversify the resources, diversify the partnership, so that other entities can come in. And just because we were with Aeros Data Center, USGS, we attracted a lot of businesses that wanted to come work with us from a minority business standpoint, 8A contracting and things like that. So it was pretty cool. I don't know if any of the tribal college did that at the time, but that's what we did. Next slide. So we wanted to obviously look at the curriculum because USGS was involved in data, GIS. Again, here's our model of what a curriculum we did, how it should be viewed. The framework at the core of it, at the bottom of it, is Lakota philosophy. And so we developed these courses with the idea that we were going to address programmers, developers, system managers, specialists, and then the general users. So again, this was a partnership between USGS, the tribe, SGU, and funding from the NSF. Next slide. We also developed products. So this is ResMapper. Again, this is a data viewer that we targeted for the community of Rosebud. And so we brought together USGS data, imagery, cultural information, pictures, historical data, historical stories, historical text, all into one easy use, point and click kind of program. And we tried to define it that met our culture. So we had a definition for GIS. One of our elders helped us with that. And so that's what you see on top there is just a long view. That's a Lakota interpretation of GIS. So very descriptive language we have, but again, that's an example of the partnership. Next. So in this partnership, we were also worked with different federal agencies. So NASA was one of them. So we were successful in competing for what they call a NASA Reason Can grant. So this was a project that we did. Again, it was just an idea, again, really to think about decision support and how we wanted to support the resource managers on Rosebud using NASA data science technology, delivering that through a high-speed network from Aeros Data Center to the university, and then thinking about how we can create a business model from that. So that was pretty cool. That was a 5-year project. Next slide. Also, part of the agreement and part of the work was that we were given a leadership role within the USGS when it comes to tribal affairs. So we said, well, as tribal colleges, we should come together, support each other in this new technology, and figure out how to support it. So with the partnership of USGS, we developed NativeView. It was a consortium of tribal colleges working together to advance our uses of that data, uses of science, and support our students. Again, there's examples of some of the projects we worked on. Disaster management, collaborative research, education, community development. So that was about an 8-year effort. Next slide. So part of that work too was to engage and interface and engage with the tribal colleges and our partners. So every year we had a forum, we call the Tribal College Forum. Again, this is a slide we had 8 of them every year. Once a year we had 8 of them. Again, this was funded by the USGS. Brought all the tribal colleges together. Again, we talked about these different things that mattered to us. Again, it was just to build a community of practice, if you will, around the tribal colleges. Next. Now I want to move into my work with the NCCAT and CU, and so I was asked to be part of this team, and I know many of you know the NCCAT, but I think this is a really interesting opportunity for us here at CU. Real thankful that CU won this project. I was helpful in that, and so I had a role in the beginning of this proposal development in terms of bringing the tribal perspective into it, the tribal partnership into it, and sort of the tribal needs. Next slide. So I was asked to represent the Great Plains Tribal Water Alliance, and within the Water Alliance, it's a boundary organization. Within that, we had defined something called the Climate Partnership. So I was given a leadership role to lead that, and so part of that work was really to begin to see how, as a tribal 501c3, really to work with the tribe and federal partners and university partners to advance climate, whether that's climate adaptation, vulnerability assessment, everything related to climate planning, we were involved. But also how we linked that to policy and decision making was a key part of this work. So that's how I got involved in NCCAT. I was contacted by a Dr. Jennifer Balch. You may have heard of her. She's pretty famous. She asked me to consider joining this proposal back in the day, and that's her picture right there. Great team. I really feel honored to work with Jennifer Balch and this work. So the Great Plains Tribal Water Alliance brought us into this work. Next slide. And so the NCCAT and really has an opportunity to challenge work with these tribal colleges, tribal governments in our region. 7 states. I think we're the largest region in terms of tribal partners and presence. And so, wow, it's a tremendous challenge. But I know that we have a team and we're working together. We have a BIA tribal liaison, Stefan Tangen's part of this, and so they've been working the last 2 years really to listen to the needs, learn about their issues, and begin to make decisions of how we put together a strategy. And so a lot of it was a lot of on the ground visiting. So we traveled together, we traveled apart, but we tried to cover all the reservations in these last 2 years. And I think that's important. I think if you don't know a partner, I think it's important to see things with your own eyes, to visit. So you're not that far away from the tremendous diversity of tribal cultures in our region. And so that's what we're doing. Next slide. So out of that, I also was asked to really talk about the Tribal Climate Leaders Program, how we did that. Well, basically, I was given the task to recruit tribal students from our 7-state region. And so I did that by attending workshops, attending conferences, primarily tribal-led, and give opportunity to speak about the Tribal Leaders Program. And I really think the strength of it really is that we had tribal government partners in that. It brought a lot of credibility to this work. It also showed the tribal folks at the University of Colorado Boulder, which has a great name in Indian country, really is committed to this program, and that we are going to do what we can to make these tribal leaders successful. And again, we're thinking about and we're talking about and we're really advocating the idea of the next tribal leader manager, tribal resource manager. So you have 5 students here. Here's their pictures. They started this semester. We're excited for them. Obviously they have challenges of COVID. They can't be there all in person now, but it's a tremendous effort. I really applaud CU, and I know Suzanne helped with this. She was part of the committees to help us get to these 5. We had a lot of interest in this program. We had a lot of interest. So there's really quality students. And also I want to make sure that I say this, that I think 4 of the 5 students here all came from tribal colleges. So now they're in a master's program at CU, and 2 of them are in a PhD program. So that's a pretty cool story. Next slide. I saw my good friend Leah Wasser on the line here. I just sort of wanted to let her know that I was glad to be part of her. They put together a proposal to NSF, and so she asked me to help develop a partnership with 2 tribal colleges. And so I was happy to do that with Oglala Lakota College and United Tribes Technical College. And I really like this part there underneath that says student project blogs. It says flooding on tribal lands. It's really good to see that on this website, and to see the commitment of CU really wanting to work with tribal college students. And so we look forward to building upon this for future opportunities for our tribal students. So Leah Wasser and her team are doing a great job. Next slide. I'm excited about this. If you look at the top, there's the world's largest native-owned and managed buffalo herd. This is on the Rosebud Sioux tribe, and so I started discussions with the tribe and the program that's going to do this buffalo herd. And so we're talking about a potential collaboration between that program and the NCCAT and possibly CERES in terms of supporting decision support around climate data, science, and technology to support this buffalo herd and to manage it in a culturally appropriate way, but the support of Western approach science. So we're in negotiation right now, but it's important that part of this work is to really identify those kind of relevant projects that tribes care about. And so if you're thinking about partnerships, you have to understand what's important to tribes and then try to align your work with their work. Next slide. So what I want to do is my last part of my talk here is to really, what I think I call windows of opportunity, see things that we can do now, things we can think about now, and how you sort of get ready for engaging with tribal or indigenous communities and tribes. Next slide. So I just sort of want to spend a little time on this. This is a report that came out of the American Indian College Fund. And so they worked with higher education university leaders This was really generated because of the incident they had at Colorado State University several years ago, where two tribal students during a college visit were sort of, they were what's the word? I mean, some lady called the cops on these two students saying they're doing this or doing that. And it created this great uproar, which I think it should have, and it also required a response. So the response was to bring tribal higher education leaders together with students to come up with this declaration of native purpose in higher education. So I would encourage you to really think about this report when we think about going forward with this strategy. There's some things in here I think that are relevant. I think they make sense. And I think that as we think about CERES and the larger university, that these are the things that the tribal people are saying what should happen in our university community. Things that's going to make students more welcome, things that create more opportunities for our native students, and also give them a better chance to graduate and to, again, to count CU as one of their their place of education. We want that same thing for CERES. We want to be people to think of CERES as this place where tribal students are welcome because there are these opportunities to bring in their own ways of knowing. There's projects that are funded to bring their ways of knowing. There are faculty members, scientist members that want to mentor them, that care about them, and want to see them succeed. So I think this is important. So I would encourage you to look at this. It's online. Next slide. We have this on campus as well. We have CNAS, Center for Native American Indigenous Studies. So you have good people there. They were supportive of this NCCAT work. We met the leadership there. I'm sitting on their advisory council right now. And so we have our meeting next month, but just sort of guiding them, really interesting because, there really hasn't been a lot of interaction between CNAs and the science community. So when we came there to visit them at their place early on in this project, they were happy to see us there, come to them and to talk to them about how do we get ready to bring these 5 students into CU Boulder? What can you tell us? How can you help us? How can we work together? So CNAs, again, they had very little interaction with the science side of the university and the science enterprise at CU like CERES, but they're there, they're dedicated, and they want to grow. So, I mean, I think it was also, you can also say this today, that there was an announcement a couple of days ago that the Board of Regents passed 7-2. I want to know who those 2 people who voted against it, but 7-2, that we're going to offer in-state tuition for American Indian students to come to CU or come to the University of Colorado or come to Colorado in general. So there's progress, but takes a long time, takes a lot of effort. I just want to highlight CNAs. They're doing good work there and the people there as well. Next slide. There's a really long, good history of tribal work and CU. This is another example of Native American Rights Fund, long time, 50 years on campus there, 50 years of working on the legal side of things. But the point is they're in your community now. They work there, they're there. If there's some things that need to be understood from a legal perspective, they're there. They're a tremendous resource. And so they've been supportive of, I think, CU students and things like that. So keep them in mind as well. Next slide. CERES is a science organization, American Indian Science and Engineering Society. They have an office in Longmont, Colorado. And so they're one of the largest American Indian organizations that support STEM education. They have annual conferences like this. Suzanne and I, we were part of this last year's conference, even though it was virtual. It was kind of weird, but we hung in there. But they are a long-standing, successful group that. So if you're looking for students and internships and networking and things like that, I would suggest that you work through Suzanne or you do your own. But they're there and they're close by. Next slide. This is also a really interesting work there at CU. This is at the law school. And so this First Peoples Worldwide is really a group that developed this organization to help support financially Indigenous people who want to live in a sustainable way. And so they're there at CU right now. I mean, they're connected to some of the biggest foundations in the world. Tremendous leadership there at this program, and so, but they're there. The point is that you have this resource there. I know that science and research is a part of that to support this kind of work. So I just want to make you aware of that if you didn't know that. First Peoples Worldwide. Next. And now I'm sort of moving into, again, awareness. I want you to know that I've been a part of this work, and this work is out there in our region. This idea of tribes getting together and talking about green energy, coming together to think about building historical cultural alliances like the Osheti-Shankomi. There's strategic planning that started. I'm part of that, and also our youth. Our youth are self-organizing and getting together, and so the Wind River Climate Summit was another effort again that's happening in our region that could have good connections for you at CERES. So there's some big things happening, and tribes are working. Next slide. This just came out here, the Dinos Tribal Drought Engagement Strategy. I share this because I was involved in this as well. It's a NOAA-funded effort. It's there. They have a strategic engagement strategy. Now we're anxious to see what's going to be the implementation. So I just make you aware of this again. This is supported by tribes in our region and the Missouri River Basin region. And so we hope that this is the next step in how we work with tribes in terms of pulling together this information so that we can take the next step in terms of implementing some of these ideas. Next. So I want to begin to close down here and just talk about, I know CERES is a data group as well, and so I just want to say that tribes in our region are really thinking deeply about the role of data and how data can be used to support tribal decision-making, nation building, and how to support students and develop the expertise that's needed. So that started in a way. There's groups working on it. I've been asked to participate in some things right now. And so I want to let you know again that tribes are working to strengthen their data efforts. They're looking at ways they can work across each other in terms of partnerships, but also what's the role of CERES and all these kind of groups to support that. So training and capacity building obviously is a big part of that. And so we'll see how this develops in the future, but why don't you make sure you know that this is happening in the Great Plains region. Next slide. So when we talk about data again, I just want to say this from a tribal perspective that, we're talking about building our tribes. If you know our tribes, a lot of times we're struggling yet. So we want to still strengthen our nation. We want to figure out how to collect better data. What are the opportunities in data governance, which is the word I really like, data governance. We want to look at best practices or community of practices. How do we take care of our data? How do we collect it? And then finally, how do we share that? We're finding more and more Indigenous communities are coming together. Our university professors, our thought leaders, our elders are talking about the role of data now. And so I'll show you some things that we're doing right now as well. But next slide. So I like this a lot because it kind of gives a tribal perspective about data and information knowledge. So when we collect our data, we're telling our story. We're information gatherers, we're information keepers. Just like our ancestors, we look at essential information to tell the stories. And these new stories are being told to sustain our people and forge into the future. So our tribal people have never shied away from data. We use that word now, but it's important to know that we hold this kind of information as well. And that's where the traditional knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, those terms come into this discussion. So that's happening and it continues to happen. Next slide. So I mentioned that there's a lot of effort. I'm connected to a lot of this stuff, but I like this slide because I kind of like to brag on myself a little bit. Suzanne says, go ahead and do that. But I just sort of wanted to let you know that I'm part of this new global effort. This happened within a year. And so there's an effort now called the Geo Digits Alliance, because again, we're looking at working with Earth observation data support tribal cultural heritage. I'm working with other Indigenous people around the world, and I represent the Rosebud Sioux tribe in this work. So so they know what I'm doing, but I want to share that with you as well. Next slide. And so we're excited about this, and you're all welcome. So please sign up today, December 7th through the 9th. It's our first Geo Indigenous Summit. And so we're bringing together Indigenous thought leaders from around the world and our partners to talk about COVID-19, data sovereignty, cultural heritage, women empowerment, traditional knowledge transfer, all the big topics. And so, again, you're welcome to be part of that. I hope that you can attend and hope that you can support this work as well. Next slide. So as I wrap up here, the next two slides here, I like this graphic because, for those who are trying to understand and figure out working with tribal people, I like this slide because it sort of represents the past and the present and future. You have three men on the hill looking for the next campsite, and they have different tools at their disposal. They have their traditional regalia, their customs, but they're looking and they're trying to gather information, data for decision making. Next, Suzanne. So that's cool. So there's a satellite, and so so now we incorporate new things, right? We incorporate new sources of information, and so it's not that our tribes have not been wanting to bring this new things into decision making. It's really about doing that in a respectful, ethical, free, prior informed consent way. Next slide. So as I wrap up, I just want to say, from my own perspective, based on where I'm at right now and my understanding of these kind of things, as an Indigenous person, we have both ways of knowing within us now. Like me, I embrace Western knowledge. I'm part of CERES. I'm part of NCCAT. But I also embrace my Indigenous knowledge as well that I have. And I think when we do that, I have a colleague of mine. Her name is Gwen Bridge. She does work in British Columbia. She's from the Saddle Lake Cree tribe, and she talks about this third way. And I think when we talk about understanding engagement, understanding working Indigenous people, I think the third way really is interesting. And I think we need more of that kind of thinking here in the lower 48. And Gwen is somebody who's helping me understand this third way in a way that we could do work with you and others in CERES and to university. A third way that is more than some of its parts, and it applies to us as all human beings. So next slide. So I just want to thank you. This is my last slide. That's my email there. I want to say Wopila Tonka Ichichiapalo. Thank you all very much for listening. Also want to say that I think this has been, for those who don't know me, this is an introduction of who I am and some of the work I've done, some of my thinking in terms of a framework of engagement, process, practice, and protocol. I'm here. I want to consider myself as a partner with you, as a resource with you, and as a colleague of yours. So as you go on that journey to define this 5-year strategic plan, or if you have other ideas that you want to work with Indigenous people, I'm here, and I'm willing to visit with you more on this. And my last thought would be, before questions, is that really the work begins with you. I'm happy to do this kind of thing, to share my experience with you, but I think it really begins with you as the individual. It begins with you doing your own homework, so to speak, to understand different cultures and to become what I call culturally intelligent, to have the motivation to do this work, to have the knowledge of cultures, working with cultures, to develop a strategy, when you're preparing for intercultural situations, and finally when your action. So you want to do something with this. So when you're in those situations working with tribes or Indigenous people, how do you adapt so that you can be effective in your collaborations? And we could do that. We have tools and assessment tools that help you identify where you're at in that cultural intelligence and help you improve. So it's a capability that we all can learn. I had to learn how to work with Suzanne Sullivan. She's a pretty high-flying scientist woman, that does all this great stuff. And so how do I work with someone like that who I don't have the same experience with her, but yet we have to find ways to work together? That requires us to have cultural intelligence. And so as an organization in CERES, I would have us think about readiness. How ready are you as an organization to undertake something like a tribal college strategy, for instance, or a tribal government or tribal nation engagement process? And what's that look like? needs to be involved in that? And what do you hope to achieve, both from the CERES side as well as the tribes? How do you get that out of the tribes side? See, when I did my work with the NCCAT, I had to do that work, also within the Great Plains Water Alliance to identify the priorities that was important to them, so they would agree to come in on this partnership. So you can't force that, but you have to understand that, and then you have to broker that. You have to bring it closer and closer together until you can come to an arrangement. And there's a time component to it, obviously, but I think this is really the future. And I think any organization that is culturally intelligent will be competitive in research, in research proposal writing, because everybody's looking for a way right now how to do this well. And so we have the great opportunity to work with tribal people, Indigenous people, because of our proximity at CU Boulder. We have a long-standing positive image, and I know that because I was out there talking for you, and that was my privilege and honor to do that. So I want to stop there, Suzanne, and I know with the time left, take questions from the chat or in person. So thank you again very much.
Thank you, James. What questions do you have for James? I mean, he presented a lot of things for us to think about. What would you like to know? We've got some time to ask James some questions. How would you like to move forward in your partnerships with Indigenous people? You can feel free to unmute yourself, or you can write a question in the chat. Okay. So,
can I ask a question?
Yes.
Sorry, this is Chris. Thanks, James, so much for that talk. It was great. I really loved your description of like cultural intelligence, and I'm wondering, it feels sometimes like it's maybe the indigenous populations that have the burden of gaining like the cultural intelligence for, say, Western knowledge and things. But I'm wondering, what about going the other direction? Do you have any recommendations or suggestions for, if we want to gain more cultural intelligence, on the indigenous population side? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, as it turns out, I'm a culture intelligence certified trainer, and one of the tools I really like is 68 question assessment. And so remember, cultural intelligence is just not ethnic culture. It could be organizational or generational as well. And so we have this 68 question assessment that you can take. And what I'll do then is that'll help me understand some of the main components of the four things I mentioned: your motivation, your knowledge, your strategy, and then your action. So it breaks down those four components into these questions that you answer. Then it comes out with a score, and then we debrief that. But I really think that your motivation, I think, is the really key part that we don't even talk about very much. We want to go to the knowledge part, right? Just tell me cultural values, tell me what to say, what not to say, what to do and what not to do, and I think we'll be okay. But I think that you'll find that, that could be frustrating because there's something called cognitive dissonance. Well, James Rattling Leaf told me to be this way. I did that, and then look what happened. It didn't turn out the way I thought it was going to turn out. So I think that, looking at really understanding your motivation of why you're doing this work, so that, when you do come up with these challenges, and you will have them, because I used, if you know me, I like to tease a lot. So I like to say I'm a friendly Indian. I'm a friendly Lakota, but there's other Lakotas like there aren't, that are on a different side of that see things differently. My work is to bring people together and to bring people to that third way, I think, where that we can do things together. I'm not trying to change science, and I'm not trying to change traditional knowledge. I want the integrity of those things, two things, to be what they are. I'm just trying to find a third way where we can work together in a respectful, reciprocal, relational, and relevant way. So I would love to talk to you more about if you want to get involved in this cultural intelligence assessment. That's one way for you to take a look at it. You're evaluated across people like you across the world. This is a world tool. This is an established tool, and I think that's one way you can begin to make progress like that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Thanks.
Questions? Let's see, Liz, you have your hand up. Are you able to unmute? You can just ask your question.
Okay. So I recently participated in a proposal, an NSF proposal, and it was to look at sort of water supply management options in the Colorado River Basin, given climate change. And it was my sort of charge to find stakeholders in the basin who would be collaborators on the project. And I really wanted to include some of the Colorado River Basin tribes in that group of collaborators, if we could. And I really had no idea how to approach that. I ended up just sending out cold call emails to people that I had seen give presentations and things like that, but I'm sure that wasn't the right way to do it. So I was curious about, given, and it was all, of course, because as a proposal, it was all very short timeline and very much a scramble really to pull it all together. But what advice would you give someone who is trying to make sure that they're bringing all the voices to the table in a setting like that, like the Colorado River Basin water users?
Well, that's a great question, and really sort of not an easy question to answer in terms of well, here's what you do kind of thing. But I would say I go back to my my work with NCCAT, and I think that you need people on your staff, on your team that are sort of like me, where old enough. I'm not going to say my age, but I'm middle-aged, but old enough to have a life experience, old enough to have grown up, around tribal issues, member of a tribe, has experience working with science organizations, understands the proposal process. But then it's really a broker kind of a role where they know you, you know them, they know what you do, they know what they do. And so it's just like the forefront. It's pretty. I think it's basic, but I also know that hiring guys like me is probably not that easy to do in terms of funding now. But I think that there are roles for people like us. If it's not me, in terms of a tribal person, I think someone with again, I go back to cultural intelligence who really doesn't have to know all the cultural aspects of it, but really understands, the nuances of these interactions, because you have to know the history of that place as well. You have to know, the past of that as well. Right. And I think that also that I mentioned relationality. I'm not even sure that's a real word, but because I work with CERES, I can make that stuff up, and then it gets published, right? James Rattling relationality. But I really think that there has to be a long-range commitment to this. I think because of the importance of water in the basin, I'm looking for someone that's going to say, you know what, this is a big-time issue for all of us, and we need to commit to finding the kind of people that's going to help us bring those people to the table. If not now, then in the future. How are we working with those next generation scientists also, so that they're prepared, they're ready for this kind of, because sometimes people say, I just want to do the science. Well, science also requires people and cultures, especially with what you're talking about, the Colorado Basin, a very complicated situation. So I would say that, you got people like Lisa Dilling. I admire Lisa Dilling and her work.
So, yeah.
I mean, you have good people there. I don't think it's just, sometimes it's the timing of things. It's just the season of things, where things are at. Working with tribes, they have a lot of things going on. So it's not just one issue they work on. And politics also involved in all this stuff as well. We just can't do science. There's a political nature to this kind of work, and which can kind of convolute relationships. So you just have to be aware of those things. And I think, finding the pathway forward, it may go this way, it may go that way, you may go back a few steps, but I'd say, make that part of your organizational DNA.
Right.
That, from day forward, we're gonna have these effective partnerships with tribes. We're gonna work with them to help define what that looks like, and we're gonna include them. I think one point is that, I'm part of the the team of CU Boulder as well.
Mm-hmm.
When I have my email out there, when I say my affiliation, that matters. So I think, those kind of people I think are important too as well when you have these conversations, and just defining a good collaborative process of communication and ownership in the project. I think I understand last minute proposals, but we try to avoid that if we can. So I think it doesn't hurt to begin to build those partnerships always. I see a lot of things happening at CU Boulder, all these meetings and events and dialogues and forums. I'm always looking if this is related to a tribe, are there tribes involved? And so the university, I think, as a whole, has to change its frame of reference and how it thinks with tribes. That we're not just a one-off thing no more, but we're integral to the future of the university, and that and I think tribes would welcome that. So that'd be my long-winded.
No, it's really helpful. Thank you so much. Yeah, very helpful.
So there's a question in the chat. I got a notice that there's 5 minutes left in this meeting. I don't know if we get kicked off or not. Just FYI. The question in the chat is, I'm wondering how Indigenous people feel about Black Lives Matter, and does it open up opportunities for further discussion?
Great question. One of the things that I do, and I think one of the things that was outlined thinking from my university perspective here now, is that they talked about raising the visibility of American Indian culture, people, students in the university environment, number one, because, we're considered, a minority group or disadvantaged group, whereas I think the more culture intelligent person would realize and understand and know that we have a special relationship with the federal government, that we have sovereignty. That's why I have put sovereignty and self-determination in my talk. I think we all have to understand what that means again, that we're just not another group, and also because of our numbers, right? I mean, I don't think we'll ever reach the point where we'll be like the Black Lives Movement in terms of its leadership, its longstanding history and experience of advocation and sort of fighting for the rights. We're a small group, but you know what? Something will happen like the Dakota Access Pipeline, right? Dakota Access Pipeline on Standing Rock. That's my people, and boom, then Indigenous issues are raised to the forefront. But then that's very few and far in between. So I think like even Bears Ears, right? Bears Ears monument issue. I mean, those coalitions that were developed and tribal people were involved in that. Again, those unique kind of alliances that come together around an issue, because they built that kind of relationship so that they can bring those people together to address the Bears Ears. So that raises the visibility. I think as you understand, I'm not to use the word power. I don't like that, but if you be to understand, that how tribes can, and who we are, can advance an interest, an environmental issue or any kind of issue. Together with that, I think, we can address hard stuff. But if you leave us out because you don't know, or you don't know, or you don't want to know, I mean, I say that's real too, because there are people in our side that don't want to work with us and that. But I think that, as CERES thinks about going forward and Black Lives Matter, I think, we've had our voices said, we continue to advocate. We find platforms to talk about what we need to talk about. And certainly we embrace allies. So, we know that other people need to take our message forward. We know they go in places where we don't go, but I think those conversations have happened, are started, and they're doing good work. So I just say that we're always trying to raise the visibility of our issues. We're trying to bring awareness, but we also want to bring something with that. Not just, hey, here we are, but here's what we care about. And we all care about our children. That's why I like talking about 7 generations. We all care about, we find that one thing that we all care about, and I say that's our children. Each one of us that are parents know that we want a better future for our children, so we don't have to endure or go through things that cause disruption in our society where it's divided instead of coming together. And so I think that your question is valid, but I'll do what I'll do. I'll keep talking in these platforms. If it takes a global platform to raise our issues, we'll do that. If it takes a regional university, tribe, walking, protesting, we'll do that. So thank you for the question. It's a good question.
Thank you, James. We have 1 minute left. Like I said, I don't know if we're going to get kicked off the platform or not. So just in case, I want to make sure to thank James very much for sharing your perspective and sharing your work and giving us some signposts to help us do well as we go forward. And I think there's probably a lot of opportunity to work more with you going forward. I mean, just based on proposals that people are working on and the ambitions that we all have at CERES.
Okay.
So
great.
So with that,
all right. Well, this is great. You tired me out, Suzanne. My voice is going here, so I want to thank everybody for their kind regards, your kind messages in the chat. It's a privilege to work with you again. I look forward to the future. So I'll sign off right now too, Suzanne, and thank you again for your leadership. Appreciate you as well.
Thank you. We'll be in touch.
All right. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, James. Some other things.
Thanks, everyone.